We've covered quite a few concepts in this module. One of the most important ones is just understanding the problem domain and the overall thing that your software is working within.
And breaking things apart. I know that when I started out, I had a really hard time really understanding differences between the core domain, the subdomains, and the bounded context, especially the subdomains and the bounded context, because at first glance, they looked like the same thing to me.
Sure, it's really easy to have an application where you have some kind of a concept like a customer that is used by every system that your organization uses, and it ends up becoming this like God object in your database and in your different applications, where any given application might only care about a tiny subset of that concept.
Yeah. So for me, I think the most important thing is really focusing on the bounded context, getting down to that and understanding about the boundaries. One thing that helps me a lot is just stating within the context of this, and then suddenly it's like, oh, right, that's what a context is. It's not like some mysterious new term that Eric Evans invented. He just is leveraging what makes sense within the context of appointment scheduling. This is what a client looks like. Within the context of billing, this is what a client looks like.
Sure, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's valuable even when you have an application, like a legacy application that wasn't built with domain-driven design. Let's go ahead and look at some more terms here. For instance, we've got what you were just talking about, I think of as context mapping. And even in a legacy application, it can be valuable to kind of map out what are all the concepts in this application and where are the overlaps with, different subdomains that maybe we haven't even defined in this legacy application.
Yeah, even if you're not planning on making huge changes to it, it's still really, really helpful to just kind of update your perspective on things. Sometimes it just leads to new understandings.
I think the shared kernel is a really important part of this too, because in almost every real world organization I've worked with, there's different types of cross-cutting concerns. And we talked about one of them being the authentication piece.
Sure.
And that's definitely, a really common one. But there's usually others too that you want to share.
Yeah, and again, it's another one of those things that sounds like it might be a big, scary, mysterious thing because you haven't referred to it that way. But if you really just start out thinking of it as the common stuff, right? But then I think one of the important things, though, is even within the context of domain-driven design, we have a ubiquitous language. Because if I say common, you might have a different idea of what I mean by common. But if I say shared kernel, we've got an agreed upon understanding of what we're talking about there. So at first, I really kind of pushed back against using these terms because I felt like a lot of the DDD experts were just throwing them around all the time. And then I started really getting a better understanding of why it's important to use those terms. It's about, it's the ubiquitous language of domain-driven design. So everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, I do agree that that's an important part of learning about DDD and other areas of software development, like, for instance, design patterns. These things give us these terms that we can use that are very, very dense.
Yeah.
If we talk about shared kernel, it would take me, 3 or 4 sentences to describe what I meant by that. But in those 2 words, you know exactly what I mean. Just like if I talk about using a strategy design pattern, that is much easier to convey than if I were to try and describe it with words and, have to draw a UML diagram just to say what I mean.
And it's the same, again, with ubiquitous language, because now I really have a better understanding of the fact that what it means is the language is ubiquitous throughout a particular bounded context. When we're talking about a scheduling app, we're going to use these terms all the way through. Like you were saying before, it's, we use it not just when we're talking to the domain expert, but in our class names, in our methods. It's just ubiquitous throughout all of the pieces of the things that are involved in that bounded context from one end all the way to the other of it.
Yeah, and I think as we'll see when we look at the code again, some of the constructs in .NET, like namespaces, are really appropriate to ubiquitous language, because when you prefix that same term in your code with a particular namespace, that tells all the other programmers that, if I say scheduling app dot notification, we know that has a different meaning than if I'm talking about a email reminder dot notification.
Right. Or scheduling app.client versus billing.client.
Exactly.
In this module, we learned about our domain, in this case, a veterinary practice. We talked about it at length with a real live domain expert and identified the core elements of our domain model. We identified a variety of subdomains and focused in on the key area that we would be addressing first with our application.
We spent some time designing the system based on our conversations with Michelle, identifying boundaries between different contexts and noting how sometimes the same object with the same name might mean something different within a different context.
Finally, we talked about the importance of communication in general, and in particular, having a ubiquitous language. We know that domain-driven design can help us avoid many design errors and wasted time miscommunicating as we work on a complex project.
Steve and I are so grateful to Eric Evans for spending time with us while we were creating this course in order to share his luminous advice and insights. In the next module, we'll drill into the domain model so you can have a good understanding of its critical elements.
This is Steve Smith.
And this is Julie Lerman. Thanks again for watching Domain Driven Design Fundamentals.